Welcome to the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show. This is our 160th episode on August 10th, 2023. My name is Andy Zee. I'm the host of the show, coming to you from Los Angeles, California. This is a show about revolution, and this year we are aiming to put revolution on the map to bring about a far better, new, emancipating way we could be living.
My name is Sunsara Taylor. I am the co-host of the Revolution Nothing Less show, and here on this show, we root ourselves in and we promote the leadership of the revolutionary leader Bob Avakian, who's the architect of a whole new framework of human emancipation, what we call the new communism. And this revolution that he is fighting for is not about revenge. It's not about the first shall be last and the last shall be first. It is, as Andy said, about emancipating all of humanity.
And later in today's show, we're going to have an excerpt from the interview that you and I did with Bob Avakian this past fall. These interviews are extraordinary, and they're extraordinarily important. They give you a sense, a real living sense of the leadership we have, the integrity of Bob Avakian, the method, the humor, the person, which then runs down through the organization that he leads, the revolutionary movement that he leads. And these interviews give you the whole thing. What the problem is, what is the problem that humanity confronts? What did it rise out of? The method to understand and change the world, the solution to this in revolution, and what kind of world we're going to be creating after the revolution. All of this is in these interviews, but today we're going to show a short segment on the woke lunacy, which is a whole mode of thought that's really, I have to use the word, infected progressive strata and lowered their sights and put a ceiling on the political imagination and the possibility that exist.
And also in today's show, we are going to expose some of the recent really egregious crimes of this system, some of the reasons we need this revolution so urgently. And we're going to be letting you know some of the ways that you need to and can be getting involved in spreading this revolution and putting it on the map with us right now this year. But with that, let's dive in. Our first opening commentary is from Andy, speaking about the escalation of the fight at the top of society with the indictment of Donald Trump. Let's go to that right now.
We want to begin this week's show speaking further to the federal indictment of Donald Trump, a former president and leading candidate for the fascist Republican nomination for president. Trump was indicted on 4 charges for what are alleged to be serious crimes in his attempt to overturn the 2020 election, including for actions connected to the attempted coup on January 6, 2021. And Trump is likely to be indicted again in Georgia in the coming weeks for violating election laws.
Police and barricades surround the Fulton County Courthouse in Atlanta, Georgia. As a possible 4th indictment, former U.S. President Donald Trump cast a shadow over the government building. This is where Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis is wrapping up an investigation into accusations Trump illegally pressured Georgia officials to overturn his 2020 election defeat.
So, look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have.
Now, nothing even remotely close to this has ever happened in U.S. history before. No losing candidate had ever attempted to overturn the results through fraud, intimidation, and force. And no leading presidential candidate has ever been indicted in the run-up to an election, let alone 4 times, let alone on counts related to fomenting a coup to overturn a previous election. The 2 most important things to understand about these indictments are, number 1, that they represent a leap and a sharpening of what is an unbridgeable divide at the very pinnacle of the U.S. ruling class. A divide between the 2 ruling class political parties, the fascist Republican Party of Trump and the Democratic Party. And this divide runs right through the whole country. It is a divide that is increasingly erupting in threats of actual violence at school boards, in election centers, at libraries, and more.
What was supposed to be a quiet reading time with drag queen Panda Dulce ended like this.
Did you guys call the cops?
It was stormed by 8 Proud Boys who disrupted the event.
The incident occurred Saturday, and witnesses who wanted to stay anonymous say the group that disrupted the event was acting aggressively and yelling offensive slurs against the LGBTQ plus community.
You know, they came in and they were screaming about, like, pedophilia and saying things like, we have to save the children. And I mean, they were terrifying the children.
Us or the pedophiles! 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 There will be blood! Blood! Blood!
And Trump's response to the multiple indictments is to double down and to rouse to a now red-hot pitch his rabid base to see his persecution as their own, with the fascist Republican Party falling in line.
I think it's a very dangerous thing to even talk about, because we do have a tremendously passionate group of voters, and I mean, maybe 100, 150. I've never seen anything like it. Much more passion than they had in 2020, and much more passion than they had in 2016. I think it would be very dangerous.
As usual, it's what's he saying there? What would be dangerous? Would be dangerous. Are we talking about violence?
The Democrats have made this high-stake indictment of Trump with the election of 2024 looming. They are countering Trump with, and they are counting on, relying on the legal process in the courts. At the same time, they agonize over both their legal and election strategy. The indictments to hold Trump accountable through the legal process of trials will likely give rise to deepening the bitter divide that cleaves the country and will set the stage for increasing confrontation that could erupt into violence.
1857 got behind the Dred Scott decision, which tore this country apart and resulted in a civil war. And that's what I fear now. I fear it could be 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. I don't know.
If Donald Trump were to be found guilty by a jury, where do you see this going?
Civil war. Civil war. Divide it up, because we can't live together, obviously.
If somehow they try to stop him from running, saying he lawfully can't run, and pull all the stops there, that won't be a pretty picture.
They kill them all. Kill them all.
I agree with you on that.
Now, the second crucial and important thing to understand about these indictments is that because of the way that this will sharpen the divide, particularly between the rulers of this country, this can heighten the potential for a revolutionary force that represents a radically better system and a way of life for the masses of people to burst on the political scene, with the potential to geometrically grow in numbers and influence, with the prospect of making an actual revolution to overthrow the capitalist imperialist system we live under and establish a new socialist republic in North America. Recognizing, acting on, and seizing this potential for a real revolution must become the understanding, the concern, and the active work of all who agonize about the future and who yearn for a world fit for humanity. But spontaneously, this is not clear to people. And very immediately, the indictments are heightening the pull that many people feel to cast their fate with the Democratic Party. This is dead wrong and a betrayal of the millions of oppressed within this country and the billions around the planet oppressed and exploited and murdered by U.S. imperialism, whichever party runs it. So, I want to speak to the many of you who agonize over the future, who care about humanity, who yearn for a world where there is justice. Too many of you either don't or refuse to see beyond the elections. Or you're just hoping that Trump gets convicted and sentenced to jail, a cheerleader. Or you're ignoring the storms that are barreling towards the shore. But this is the reality we face. Trump has said, quote, "I am your retribution." And quote, "This is the final battle." And quote, "This is it, either they win or we win." And for his part, Biden has rallied the Democrats and the NATO military alliance and all too many decent people to cheer them on as they continually escalate the proxy war with Russia over the Ukraine, bringing us closer to the brink of nuclear annihilation.
Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia. Never.
Dmitry Medvedev, the deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council, says Russia may have to use nuclear weapons if Ukraine's counteroffensive is successful, and ends with, quote, part of our land being taken away.
We will not waver. We will not waver.
And while the fascists deny climate change and want to scrap all the measures to reduce global warming, while we have just had the warmest month in maybe 120,000 years, the Democrats, as the party of normalcy, they talk climate change while drilling, essentially fiddling while the world burns.
In an effort to lower gas prices, President Biden is responding to calls to boost U.S. oil production by reselling leases for drilling and on public land.
We're still going to need oil and gas for a while. But guess what? No, we do.
President Biden's move to approve a drilling project in Alaska drawing criticism tonight, approving a controversial plan to allow a new $8 billion oil drilling project.
Shaping up before us now are two fundamentally opposed futures, something terrible or something truly emancipating. Which future we get depends to a great extent on what we do. To understand this situation and the positive potential it holds requires a scientific method and approach of the new communism developed by Bob Avakian. It means analyzing reality as it actually exists, going beneath the surface to reveal and then pull up the roots of what oppresses humanity today. The indictments of Trump underscores why it is essential to see that the problem we face lies in the system that has given rise to this divide in the ruling class, and to recognize that within that divide lies the potential for the masses of people to break with this system and get with the revolution that is working for a whole new emancipating way to live if we bring that alive to the people. This reality that we face is concentrated in the 7 key points organizing for an actual revolution, which you can find at our website, revcom.us. It begins, quote, brutal and murderous white supremacy, male supremacy, and other oppressive relations, the deepening crisis in society and the world overall, including the constant wars and continuing destruction of the environment. All this cannot ultimately be resolved in any positive way within the confines of the system that rules in this country and dominates in the world as a whole, the system of capitalism, imperialism. Under the rule of this system, all this will only get worse. And because of big changes in this country and the world overall, one part of the ruling class, represented by the Republican Party, has become fascist. They no longer believe in or feel bound by what have been the norms of democratic capitalist rule in this country. And the other section of the ruling class, represented by the Democratic Party, have no real answer to this except trying to maintain the normal way that the oppressive rule of this system has been enforced for hundreds of years, while the fascists are determined to tear up those norms and rule through more openly and aggressively oppressive means without the traditional disguise of supposed democracy for all. This profound divide has just become deeper, sharper, and more volatile with the indictments of Trump. And if the sight of armed fascists at the polling places in Maricopa County in Arizona during the last 2 elections doesn't portend the future, listen to this drawn from the actual indictment of Donald Trump. One of Trump's senior advisors told one of Trump's co-conspirators, quote, "You're going to cause riots in the streets." And co-conspirator 2 responded that there had previously been points in the nation's history where violence was necessary to protect the republic. It also tells of Jeffrey Clark of the Department of Justice, who Trump wanted to make Attorney General, being warned that this attempt to override the election would lead to folks being out in the streets and would lead to riots. And the response from Clark was, quote, "Well, that's what the Insurrection Act is for," end quote. In other words, call out the military to suppress and crush those rising up. All of this is coming to a head, to a pivotal point with the 2024 election. For Trump, the election is his way out of any conviction or prison sentence, and his indictment, the red meat that he's feeding to his followers. but more fundamentally, the now fully fascist Republican Party with theocratic fascists at its core who regard Trump as their messiah and who occupy positions of power from the Congress to the Supreme Court down to school boards and the tens of millions of gun-toting, unthinking fascists throughout society see this, the re-election of Trump, the election of a fascist president, as their last chance to save their country and lock in their white supremacist, patriarchal America First vision for the future. All this while the planet is on fire and the wheels of danger of nuclear war escalate. But we must not let this stay as a fight between the fascists and those among the rulers who are fighting for the way things have been in this country. If we let this stay on the terms of this system, then that would be a terrible betrayal of the people of the planet and of the oppressed within the U.S., as well as of future generations whose very existence this system endangers. We need to wage a ferocious struggle against the bourgeois electoral illusions, the BEB, that saturate the decent people. Sitting back and cheerleading the indictments, and then the trials will squander this rare chance to get this system off the backs of humanity. All this underscores the scientific depth and the import of this paragraph from Bob Avakian, which we have read many times on the RNL show. Quote, "As the normal way society has been ruled is failing to hold things together, and society is increasingly being ripped apart, this can shake people's belief that the way things have always been is the only way things can be. It can make people more open to questioning. In a real sense, it can force people to question the way things have been and whether they have to stay that way. And this is all the more likely to happen if the revolutionary forces are out among the people, shining a light on the deeper reality of what is happening and why, and bringing out that there is an alternative to living this way. That alternative is concentrated in the declaration that urgently needs to be seen and taken up now, right now, by thousands. We need and we demand a whole new way to live, a fundamentally different system. A whole different way of living is possible, a whole different way to organize society, with a radically different economic foundation and political system, emancipating relations among people and an uplifting culture. All this oriented to meeting the basic needs and fulfilling the highest interests of the masses of people. And with the urgency the situation requires, we declare and we demand the existing capitalist imperialist system and institutions of government in this country must be abolished and dismantled and replaced by a new socialist system based on the Constitution for the new Socialist Republic in North America.
OShaeSibley should be dancing. But instead, OShaeSibley is dead, killed at 28 years old for being a gay black man. On July 29th, O'Shea and a group of friends were coming back from a day at the beach. They stopped to get gas, blasting Beyonce and dancing. They were approached by a group of men who demanded that they stop. After a series of verbal exchanges, O'Shea was stabbed in the heart and later died. The person accused and seen on video is a 17-year-old high school student. We don't know at this time what may have motivated the person who stabbed O'Shea. O'Shea's friend, Otis Pena, who put pressure on his wound to try to stop him from bleeding out, said the group of guys hurled anti-gay slurs at them and said they were screaming, "We Muslim and we don't like gays."
They killed O'Shea. They killed him right in front of me. I was covered in his blood. They murdered him because he was gay. Because he stood up for his friends.
Otis said O'Shea was trying to calmly talk with the guys. That it's okay to be gay. We're just listening to our music. There's no hate. It's all love. While several witnesses have verified Otis's account, the lawyer for the 17-year-old arrested said he's actually Christian. And there's more video and witness testimony to be seen and heard. So while there are things we don't know about this incident, there are important things that we do know. And there are urgent questions that we need to ask. O'Shea was an accomplished professional dancer.
Branches were sown by the color of green. The ground had a rose and past its knees.
On the night he was killed, O'Shea and his friends were voguing, a style of dance that comes out of the black queer culture from the 1970s. O'Shea was out, loud, proud, and full of grace, refusing to be shamed by the dominant anti-LGBTQ patriarchal society. In June 2020, at the height of the uprisings against the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, O'Shea took part in a video to celebrate Pride 2020 and pay homage to the Black Lives Matter movement. The caption to the video says that this video showcases how black and brown, queer and trans people can use voguing as a form of protest and as a source of joy in this political climate.
Came through up and up, came through a driven and a driven and a came through a cut and a came through a came and a cut and a I'm a C-U-N-T cutty, why C-U-N-T.
We have to ask, what kind of society and culture fills a 17-year-old with such hatred of those whose sheer existence challenges the patriarchal gender norms that they lash out with this kind of deadly violence? It's a society that rears men and boys on an aggressive and violent masculinity. A culture where all the major religions, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, are saturated in and serve to reinforce patriarchy and male supremacy going back thousands of years. From a very early age, boys are brought up to think that their worth and their power is their manhood, which they have to prove and which they have a duty to enforce. You have to be strong, not weak. You have to be dominant, not the dominated. You have to be a wolf, not a sheep, alpha, not beta. You have to fight for your position in the pecking order, and if you don't want to be a bitch, you have to make someone your bitch, all with an electric undercurrent of violence and the threat of violence. While this is largely directed at the domination and degradation of women, there is a special hatred and violence reserved for men who defy these roles. Men who are or appear to be weak or effeminate, a pussy, a bitch, a faggot. And trans women, gay men, even worse. You are told that to be a strong motherfucker, you have to crush what you see as weak motherfuckers. And you see this in religion, in the family, in the culture, in the widespread violence and degradation of porn and music. Baby boys told not to cry like a girl. The dick-grabbing assertion of being a man, which requires the domination of women and the rejection of anything seen as feminine. Why else is it that when a man says something nice to another man, they feel they have to preface it with the disclaimer of no homo?
Were you aware of the fact that he said that when he came back to Brooklyn, he had to bring the good looks because you guys were lacking that?
I seen it, but I was like, man, he's just talking for the laughs. We already had good-looking dudes, no homo. But you know how it go.
All right.
All this calls to mind the sharp insight and the criticism of this guy culture from the revolutionary leader, Bob Avakian.
Because a big part of all this is what we could call guy culture. It's a culture of degrading domination of women and of wanton violence, a kind of pornography of violence with an American chauvinist and male chauvinist thrust to it. Think about some of these video games where the point is you go out and you kill America's enemies. That's the point of the video game as identified by the army and the ruling class as a whole. Or the video games where a lot of youth are trained and conditioned to think while they're playing the game. They think they're just going like using their thumbs and fingers. They're using their brains, though. Their brains are being influenced. You have video games not only go out and kill America's enemies, you have video games where the high point is you get to hunt down and kill a woman who's portrayed as a whore. How does this condition young people, boys in particular, to think about women and the relations between genders?
We don't have to accept this. We don't have to live this way. This is not human nature, and it's not the nature of men. This kind of patriarchal dominance and degradation comes out of the earliest divisions of oppressor and oppressed and has now been fully integrated into this system of capitalism imperialism. This cannot be reformed. This system needs to be overthrown through an actual all-out revolution, overcoming all traditions' chains, all of what's embodied in these traditional gender roles and divisions, and all the oppressive relations bound up with this. But this won't happen without oppressed people, men, women, and differently gendered people, coming together as equals and comrades to end all oppression. This is where our strength lies. This is where our beauty lies, in celebrating our differences, not in domination, but in emancipation. Breaking with, uprooting, and abolishing these outmoded ideas of what it means to be a man or a woman. Redefining what it means to be human.
Woke lunacy is one of the most destructive modes of thought and behavior that is infecting and afflicting progressive and decent people, especially young people. I'm talking about word changing instead of world changing. I'm talking about people obsessing with canceling each other and tearing down individuals rather than going after this system itself and tearing it down and replacing it. I'm talking about the identity politics, people judging what somebody has to say based on their identity rather than its content. And there's many other manifestations of this that are plaguing our society right now. But this is something we had the chance to ask Bob Avakian about in the interviews that Andy and I did with him last fall. And he gave an incredibly in-depth answer that had many dimensions that he went into. We're going to show you an excerpt of his answer, and we're going to encourage you afterwards to go and watch the full interviews. This is from part 2. Let's watch.
You know, and you hear it all the time, your truth, our truth. You know, there's not different truths. Truth, let's get this clear. Truth simply means an accurate reflection of reality. It means that what's being said about something corresponds to the actual reality. Like I just said, it's true that the earth is round, not flat. Okay, that's a truth. There's not different truths for different identities. So right away, epistemologically, in terms of its anti-scientific approach, this identity politics wokeness is wrong, and it's bound to do harm because when you're not only unscientific but you're anti-scientific. When you hear some of these wokesters will even say things like, "Oh, objective reality, that's a white male supremacist construct. There is no objective reality." That is obviously harmful because if you don't even know that there's objective reality or you deny that there's objective reality, then how can you actually understand objective reality and go about changing it in the way it needs to be changed? You can't. You're only going to be misled. And this does a great deal of harm just on that level. And it confuses a lot of people, And then there's the whole thing that flows out of that. Why? What goes along with denying objective reality and saying that there's not truth, but just different truths for different identities? I mean, yes, look, let's examine it. For people who are oppressed, but by the way, I use the word oppressed deliberately, not marginalized, because let's examine these terms. Things are understood best in terms of their opposites. Mm-hmm. Understand up by what's down, right? Understand cold by what's hot, so on and so forth. What's the opposite of marginalized? It means being not marginalized. It means being in the mainstream. It means being included in the society as it is. If you're talking about marginalization, then that's the logical remedy, quote unquote. But if you're talking about oppression, and it's not just our narrative versus their narrative, it's actual oppression, people being held down, forcibly held down, being violently suppressed. That's oppression, means pushing down on people, keeping them down. If you're oppressed, the answer to it is to end the oppression. And then you go looking for what's the source of the oppression, what is it rooted in, and how do we uproot it? Because if you want to uproot something, you have to know what it's rooted in. And it's rooted in this system, all these different forms of oppression. So marginalized, right there, you see something's wrong. Now, this does a lot of harm, because then if you say there's different realities for different people, and you say some people are marginalized, then those people who've been left out, who've been pushed to the margins or kept in the margins, it should be their turn now. You know, the whole point, Lenin once said, anybody who makes a revolution with the outlook, you had your turn, now it's my chance to have a go. Anybody who does that does it with the outlook of the petty bourgeoisie, the middle class. And that is not an outlook that can lead a revolution. The middle class precisely in between. It's caught in between these two contending classes, the proletariat, the masses of oppressed people, and the oppressors, the ruling class. And so it wants to try to carve out a position for itself in between and try to hold off these two different opposing, fundamentally opposing forces. But it can't do it. And so its positions are always, ill-founded. They always are out of keeping with reality. But this is the way these people want to talk about it. Now, if you are trying to actually fight against oppression and you run up against all this identity politics wokeness, then what happens? Well, the marginalized, they haven't been allowed to have their right to speak and their right to get somewhere, so they have to be in the front of everything. Doesn't matter where it's going as long as they're in the front of it. And, it's not going toward ending their actually oppressed condition. It's just, at most, striving for a better position within the system as it exists with all of its horrific oppression, and yes, resting parasitically, living off of billions of people in the world as a whole. And then this has a confusing and intimidating effect on people. I mean, I was saying to somebody, you even see it in the ads. There was for one thing, these corporations and this ruling class, they're very adept at recognizing these trends and using for their own purposes. Like I saw an ad, there was this black woman talking about her role in finance, and she says, I believe there's going to be a revolution. We're going to have a lot more black women in finance. Bulletin, that is not a revolution, okay? It's just, getting more people who've been kept out on the inside of an oppressive system. Yes, discrimination should certainly be opposed. Yes, oppression should be fought for, even while we're still forced to live under this system. But the question is, do you want to get rid of this oppression, or do you just want to change the positions within it? Get more people who've been marginalized having their chance to have a go at it. See, this is a fundamental question. And another ad I saw was ad for one of these big financial companies, and it was pimping off of the 2020 uprising. So it had all this stuff about Black Lives Matter, which all translated into black businesses, by the way, not surprisingly. And then they had all these slogans from the 2020 uprising, and then they had this white guy go like this, and then there's somebody black tells him, "Don't do that. That's not your place. You see, that's not your capital. This is our capital." It's turning oppression into capital, into leverage to improve your individual position, or maybe the position of a few people like you. It's viewing oppression and the struggle against oppression as capital, not something aimed at ending the oppression by ending the system in which all this oppression is grounded and which enforces all this oppression. So, this kind of stuff, don't do that. Fuck that. A lot of more white people need to be going like that and meaning it, okay? Mm-hmm. That's one thing. It's not that they come in and say, you don't know what you're doing. You black people, you can't do anything right. Let us white people do it. No, that's completely wrong. We have seen too much of that, okay. But if it's a matter of what's the objective reality and how you're going to change it, then the question is, you need a scientific approach to that. You need to actually analyze, interact with the objective reality, analyze it, and then synthesize it by identifying the patterns, what are the underlying causes, what are the contradictions within it, and what are the possibilities for transforming it.
Once again, that was Bob Avakian from the BA Interviews right here on this channel, speaking about woke lunacy. And it's just a portion of the answer that he gave. We encourage you to go watch the entire thing and the entire interviews. Before we move forward in the episode today, I want to make sure that you all know, we announced it at revcom.us as well, that we are back on the scene with the Woke Lunacy versus Real Revolution tour and campaign, where we're taking this orientation that Bob Avakian has pioneered out into the world, especially on the college campuses, but everywhere where people are thinking about and agonizing about this world that we're in and the worsening situation, and trying to shake them loose from this woke lunacy and win them to actual revolution. So right now, coming up next week, Rafael Caderas, a frequent contributor to this show and somebody spearheading this campaign with me against woke lunacy, will be speaking in New York City at Revolution Books in Harlem. Again, August 15th. If you're anywhere in the East Coast area, can get there, you should go there. And then he's leading a crew down to the ASA, the Sociology, American Sociology Convention in Philadelphia later that week, where we're going to be taking this campaign, this revolution to that conference, as well as a campaign and speaking tour that Raymond Latta is doing on real communism and challenging the lies and bringing forward the new communism that Bob Avakian has forged and that people need. So this is going to be an exciting mission. We'll be reporting on it on our website and probably on this show, but if you can get there as well, please reach out and join our crew there. In response to the racist murder of civil rights leader Medgar Evers in Jackson, Mississippi, and to the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, killing 4 little girls, Nina Simone released the song, Mississippi Goddamn.
Alabama's got me so upset. Tennessee made me lose my rest. Everybody knows about Mississippi Goddamn. Can't you see it? I know you can feel it. It's all in the air. I can't stand the pressure much longer. Somebody say a prayer. Alabama's got me so upset, and Governor Wallace has made me lose my rest. Everybody knows about Mississippi Goddamn. Hound dogs on my trail, school children sitting in jail. Black cat crossed my path. I think every day's gonna be my last.
That was 1964, but that song could have been released last week. On Thursday, August 3rd, 6 white former Mississippi pigs pled guilty in federal court to 16 felonies. Why? Because on January 24th of this year, these white cops kicked in the door of the home of 2 black men in Braxton, Mississippi, without a warrant. These pigs called themselves the Goon Squads, according to court documents.
They allegedly call themselves the Goon Squad, a group of 6 white former Mississippi law enforcement officers giving themselves that moniker because of their alleged willingness to use excessive force and not to report.
They quickly shackled the 2 black men, Eddie Terrell Parker, 35 years old, and Michael Corey Jenkins, 32. Now stop right there and think about the terror that every black person feels when cops come at them. Now think of this combined with your very home being invaded. You are shackled, no witnesses. And then for the next 90 minutes, these pigs degrade, brutalize, and torture you while you're shackled. These pigs punched and kicked Eddie and Michael repeatedly. They tased them 17 times. They sexually assaulted them. They shoved them on their backs and waterboarded them, pouring eggs, milk, alcohol, grease, chocolate syrup all over their faces.
They made us lay down on our back, and he came with the pouring milk, in my face. I mean, it was milk coming out my nose, my mouth, and I just, it was I've never been, in that position or in that, and I guess felt the way that I felt that night. I mean, as far as not being able to breathe, it was both breathing and trying to, keep breathing and keep from drowning.
They beat Parker and Jenkins with pieces of wood. They beat them with a metal sword. Again, the whole time these men were shackled. Then they forced them to their knees and with guns to their heads threatened to execute them. And after firing multiple rounds into the air, one of these pigs stuck his gun in Michael Jenkins' mouth and pulled the trigger. The bullet tore through Jenkins' tongue, fractured his jaw, came out his neck.
He was standing over here, I was sideways like this. I was looking up at him like this. That's the reason why I come out the side of my head. If it comes straight at the back of my head, I probably would have been dead if I wouldn't have been looking at him like this.
Somehow he survived. But while Jenkins lay bleeding on the floor, these pigs went out to the porch and concocted a story to cover their tracks. They decided to plant drugs, to steal the surveillance footage from the house, and plant a gun. They took Jenkins to a side room and staged a drug bust over the phone, claiming that Jenkins had reached for a gun when his handcuffs were removed. And then the next day, the Mississippi Bureau of Investigations issued a press release that parroted all of these lies. So what was the real crime? In the eyes of these pigs, it was two black men on the wrong side of town. You see, Eddie Parker had been living in Braxton to help the owner of the home he was living in, a white woman who is paralyzed, take care of her house. The two had been friends for 20 years. But a white neighbor complained to one of these Goon Squad pigs that black people were staying with a white woman. And that's all it took.
This was almost a 2-hour controlled torture and interrogation session by racist officers. They came in asking both men, were they dating white women? And throughout the course of the torture session, they constantly, all of them were using the word nigger, constantly calling them nigger, and at times monkeys.
So after all of this depravity, after all this brutality and torture, it was Michael Jenkins, even as he was fighting for his life in intensive care, who was charged with aggravated assault and possession of a controlled substance. And Eddie Parker was charged with possession of paraphernalia and obstruction of justice. Now here, I want you to ask yourself, not just what kind of sick motherfuckers these pigs were to do this, but what kind of a sick system we live under, where the justice system then puts charges on the victims of this depravity rather on the police lynch mob that carried out the actual crime. And when Mary Jenkins, Michael's mother, finally reached a deputy sheriff after calling desperately to the hospitals and police looking for her son, when she asked this deputy sheriff when she could see her son, she was told, and I quote, "Michael is our property, and we can hold him as long as we want. Like fucking slavery days. He is our property. We can hold him as long as we want." And after all of this, it was not until 5 months later, June 27th, that the sheriff's deputies involved in this raid were fired or forced to resign. And do I even have to tell you that this was not the first time these pigs carried out this kind of torture? An Associated Press investigation found that several of the pigs involved in this torture were connected to at least 4 other violent encounters with black men just since 2019. These incidents left 2 of these men dead and another with injuries. And this is not just Mississippi. Depraved, sexually sadistic, brutal torture of black men by cops goes on all across this country. Google what was done to Abner Louima in New York City. Google the more than 40 instances of documented torture carried out over years by the Chicago pig John Burge, torture that extracted forced confessions that contributed to 10 of these men ending up on death row. And then, if you have the stomach for it, keep Googling and you'll find more. This is why it is totally appropriate that the band, Outernational, built on Nina Simone's song to issue America, Goddamn, which we will play at the end of this segment. But what stands out most of all is that the Braxton Goon Squad, like so many pigs before them, had clearly been operating for years, and they clearly felt they had utter impunity for their actions. Why? Because as Bob Avakian, the revolutionary leader, has put it, quote, "The role of the police is not to serve and protect the people. It is to serve and protect the system that rules over the people, to enforce the relations of exploitation and oppression, the conditions of poverty, misery, and degradation into which this system has cast people and is determined to keep people in. The law and order the police are about, with all of their brutality and murder, is the law and order that enforces all of this oppression and madness. And all this will continue, and it will only get worse as long as we continue to be forced to live under this system. This is why we need and we demand a whole new way to live, a fundamentally different system. And quoting from the document by that title, issued by the Revcoms, we declare and demand the existing capitalist imperialist system and its institutions of government in this country must be abolished and dismantled and replaced by a new socialist system based on the Constitution for the new socialist republic in North America. As we state in this document, under this new system, quote, the role of government institutions established with this new socialist constitution, including the police and military, will no longer be to contain, control, repress, brutalize, murder, and slaughter people here and all over the world. Instead, these radically new institutions will safeguard the rights of the people and give backing to the masses of people in moving to abolish all forms of discrimination and inequality, all relations of oppression and exploitation. They will defend the new, emancipating society against attempts to sabotage, attack, and destroy it, and will support people throughout the world fighting for the goal of emancipation. We need this revolution. We need it as soon as possible. Get with this revolution and do it today.
Slavery hasn't changed, my friend. It's just adopted a new face.
It's in the very fabric of American society. Goddamn! I couldn't stand it. Goddamn!
I'm treated like a piece of shit.
Goddamn!
I'm no more than a nigga here.
No filter, no flashes, 400 years, middle passage. Sold down the river, black bodies in the breeze, babies born, beaten and burned, 100 million lashes. America could bloodlust, America could irredeemable America could imagine a world without America could Goddamn! You coming for me? You wanna take me out? Goddamn!
Goddamn, you motherfuckers!
In our proclamation that we issued on May 1st of this year, we are the Revcoms, revolutionary communists. We are working for a real revolution and a whole new emancipating way to live. In this document, which lays out our strategy, why we need a revolution, how we're working to make it real, the moment that we're in, towards the conclusion, we write, and this year, as a crucial part of carrying out this strategy, we are determined to put revolution on the map in a major way, so that throughout society, people will know about this revolution and its leadership, and growing numbers of people will be drawn to becoming part of this revolution. So next we want to go to Noche Diaz, who is a national spokesperson for the Revolution Clubs, and Joe Veale, who is a longtime follower of Bob Avakian, former Black Panther Party member and revolutionary communist, talking about one of the major components of this putting revolution on the map this year. Let's hear what they have to say.
Hi, I'm Noche Diaz, national spokesperson for the Revolution Clubs. We base ourselves on the understanding that humanity needs revolution and the new communism developed by Bob Avakian, and we apply the strategic approach of fight the power and transform the people for revolution. With the world as it is, and the future headed towards something terrible or something truly emancipating, we understand that which future we get depends to a great extent on what we, including you, do now. So, we here in LA have developed big plans for making a serious leap in bringing forward a revolutionary people and organized forces for this revolution that we aim to make a leap in the next 6 weeks. A big part of this plan is what we call saturation with the core message, program, strategy, and leadership that we have for this revolution that's concentrated in the proclamation, "We are the Revcoms," the declaration, "We need and we demand a whole new way to live and a fundamentally different system," and in the interviews conducted with Bob Avakian, heart and soul and hardcore for revolution. So I'm joined today by Joe Veale.
Glad to be here.
Joe Veale is a veteran revolutionary, follower of Bob Avakian, and a former Black Panther. So, Joe, we've been talking and working to involve people in this big plan. And, one of the things I'd like to ask you about is, since we talk all the time about spreading the word about this revolution, what do we mean with this plan when we say that the core of it is really saturation with this core message?
I mean, it being everywhere, where everybody knows about this revolution. Everybody having a sense of that. It gives people a sense that something is brewing, something is coming, something big is coming. And when you see something like saturated, when you see it like everywhere, it gives that sense to like people. It's kind of like when you see maybe sometimes you see a new movie coming out. You see something on a billboard or whatever, and you start seeing it like everywhere. Wherever you go, you start like seeing it and stuff everywhere. It's unescapable. You can't ignore it. It's everywhere, and that's what we talk about. That's what we mean. We talk about saturation, that about this revolution and stuff with these posters, it being like everywhere and everybody like knowing about it and shit. That's what we mean.
That's really important. And, as part of conveying why that's the core of the plan, why don't you say a little bit, talk to us about what does it change when you achieve saturation with this?
It just changes the terms of things, In society, it just changes. That revolution, it puts revolution on the map. It puts revolution on the agenda for people. Maybe for people for the first time, or maybe some people who've forgotten about, who hoped it once but forgot about it, or suppressed it, But it puts that on the map for people, and put that hope. And maybe there is hope for a whole new way, that we can live in a whole different society under a whole different system. It brings that out, the best aspirations that people have, that we can make this real and stuff, So that's part of like what it changes when you saturate it in that way. You know, and it makes people like think, hey, who is this, the leadership for this revolution? Who is Bob Avakian? Who is BA and stuff? Is this some kind of like, people are attacking, people are lying about it, people are slandering because they don't want to see it to happen and stuff. But it's out there and it's real. And it makes people like look into that, the realness like of it and stuff, and see who Bob Avakian is and what is the new communism about that he has developed and brought forward. It brings all that out. It brings out like that we got the Revcoms, which is part of the leadership for this revolution that follows BA and stuff. That with a strategy for making revolution and stuff, especially and how like in this time, you know, in this time when people like think that revolution is not possible, that it was more possible back in the 60s, but it's not possible like now, that why it is even more possible now than it was back then. And it changes all of that. It just changes all of that, and it just changes the whole like terms of like thing, and start bringing people into a process that they need to be like part of, and in different ways contributed to this process and being like part of it and stuff, you know. And hey, that's really what's needed, you know. It's so urgently like needed like now in this time, because, you know, these are rare times that we're living in. We can't, you know, we can't afford like to, you know, not seize it.
Well, Joe, I want to thank you for that. And, you know, you really gave us a lot there, you know, reminding us and letting us, you know, sort of bringing alive the fact that we're talking about not just spreading the good word, but actually changing the situation by getting this everywhere so that people are connected up with and are having to debate and argue over, you know, this understanding, this revolution that's being built and the leadership that we have for this revolution. I just want to remind you that what future we get, again, is up to what we do now, including you. So wherever you are, if you're close to LA and can get down here for the weekend, join us, because we're going out this weekend for Operation Saturation. We're not just hoping that in the next few weeks somebody somewhere, we're concentrating our efforts. We've got a map of the city. We've got neighborhoods, you know, carved out that we're aiming to get 2,000 posters, raise $1,000, get, you know, and really aim to win in achieving saturation. But wherever you are, make plans for the next 6 weeks to actually achieve the same kind of thing, you know, wherever you are, in places that you can, in a serious way, because we have to seize this time and make good. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Joe, for sharing that with us.
Yeah, my pleasure. Happy to be here.
And finally, before we get to the end of today's episode, we want to share with you some footage of what the Revcoms did last week on the anniversary of the war crime and crime against humanity of the U.S. bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki with nuclear weapons 78 years ago.
Locally in Little Tokyo, an anti-nuke protest. This was put on by a group going by the name Revcom. Self-proclaimed revolutionary communists. They use special effects makeup and a smoke bomb to make one woman look like a victim of a nuclear war. Similar protests like this one happened in New York, Chicago, and Houston.
One group held a rally in Little Tokyo.
The reason why we are out here is because the danger of nuclear war has never been greater.
The group known as Revcoms, which describes itself as revolutionary communists, is denouncing the bombings at Hiroshima and Nagasaki as crimes against humanity. The group gave us this
It was a sunny day in Hiroshima 78 years ago, just like this day. Yet the U.S., in the bright of day, dropped a nuclear bomb, incinerating thousands of people in a matter of minutes, burning their flesh, taking away their eyeballs and their skulls. Hundreds of thousands of people more died and had birth defects. This is the crimes of this government and this system of capitalism, imperialism.
So I found out about the Revcoms on TikTok, actually. I followed the Revcoms. They DM'd me like literally 24 hours later and told me about the Los Angeles chapter, and they got me connected right away. So today I'm doing a replica of a victim of the bombing in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I'm trying to really visually show people how gruesome it was, how horrific it was. This is something that needs to be in your face.
The threat of nuclear war has not gone away. The U.S. is waging a proxy war with Russia, two rival imperialist gangsters who have the most nuclear weapons in all of the world. If they were to go to nuclear war, that would mean the incineration of millions of people. Do you want to live that way? Is that the future we want to condemn humanity? Or do we want to fight for an emancipating future? A future where humanity can flourish. A future where children don't have to look at the sky in fear for their lives. That world is possible, but it's not going to be possible without you. It's not going to be possible without overthrowing this whole damn system. And everyone, all the decent people who have a heart for humanity, you need to get with this revolution right now. Day one, after we overthrow, dismantle, disarm, and abolish the U.S. capitalist imperialist system, we can and we would go to work at dismantling all nuclear weapons. You need to get with the Revcoms because now is the time.
All right, Sunsara, that brings us to the end of this, the 160th episode of the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show.
That's right. I have to say that was very stunning footage of the Revcoms out on the anniversary of Hiroshima, that bombing. Really glad it got in the news. Really incredible portrayal and the work that the artist did with the makeup. So I hope that you all were moved by that as well. And the other things that you heard in this show, including from Noche and Joe about joining this campaign to spread this revolution, these proclamations out in the world this coming weekend and going forward. Before we close out, I want to ask you to become a Patreon and support this show. Regularly, every month, we need your support to put this show out, to spread it, to let this be seen by many more people, because this is a connection to and training ground for thousands and soon millions to join this revolution. It is urgent. $3 a month, $15 a month, $50 a month, whatever fits your budget. Go to patreon.com/therevcoms and become part of the community supporting this show.
And spread the show to your friends on social media, in talking to people, watch it with others. So with that, Sunsara, I'm going to say goodnight for the whole crew here at the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show. We'll see you next week on Thursday night at 5 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Central time, and 8 p.m. Eastern time. So good night.